In the beginning, there was nothing, and this seemed to go on for a rather long time. In fact, it was ages. Then, after a good while longer, there was still nothing, and it was very dull and very dark outside. But eventually, this began to change, and there were signs of, well, something. Not very much, but at least something was beginning to happen. As it is well known, life began on Primitive Planet. So let's see how this happened and take a closer look at the origins of primitive life and primitive people. On Primitive Planet, life was beginning to take shapes, but just primitive shapes at first, mainly cones, cubes, cylinders, and blobby spheres, and then taking on some very odd shapes indeed. Out of the volcano, along the rather long lava road, could be seen a group of primitive chickens crossing, and here we can see that the concern of the proverbial, which came first, the chicken or the egg, can now finally be cleared up, since from the look of the primitive chicken, they obviously both did. Along Lava Road, supposedly the first road ever, life gradually began to appear. There was lots of matter just floating about on the early stages of Lava Road, until in the middle of the distant horizon, there it was, Prim City, the primitive city in the oasis, home to Mr. and Mrs. Prim. Not much of a city really, just Mr. and Mrs. Prim, in their nice little primitive house around their nice little oasis. But they liked it, and they proudly called it home. Mr. and Mrs. Prim claimed to be the first primitive people ever in the history of the universe. They loved living at their little oasis, just sitting around the pool all day, and life for them was a permanent holiday. So permanent, in fact, was their holiday that they got rather bored of this, and one day decided that what they needed was a holiday. So just to relieve themselves of the monotony of living in paradise all the time, they decided to get in their shiny new rocket and take a trip to Happy Planet to see what all the fuss was about. On their way to Happy Planet, the Prims thought they'd stop off for a cup of tea at Planet Odd. Planet Odd is a very odd place indeed, and the crazy King Odd and his oddballs just seem to spend their days bouncing up and down a lot. Despite knowing this, the Prims still decided to take a closer look, but rather quickly realised that perhaps stopping off was not such a good idea, since King Odd was so incredibly odd. So they didn't hang about on Planet Odd because it was so very odd, and off they scootled rather quickly away, off in the direction of Happy Planet. The evil King Cone was planning to attack Happy Planet and take over the universe. King Cone and his evil Cone army were getting ready to set off on their sinister mission. Whilst King Cone schemed away, the Hell's Hoverbikers were up to their usual antics, speeding across the galaxy, being followed rather doggedly in lukewarm pursuit by wily old space cop. And then there was Astronaut, the calamitous spaceboarder, practicing for the Intergalactic Spaceboarding Championships. But alas, he still didn't know how to stop. The Prims were beginning their descent into the asteroids, which looked unusually congested today with all kinds of space traffic. Out in these distant reaches of Happy Galaxy, the road etiquette was basically everyone for themselves, which tended to make travelling at this time of day quite hectic. It was at this point that King Cone was forced to seriously reconsider the scale of his ambitions, as his sense of perspective was clearly warped. He surely must have been suffering from delusions of grandeur. Just a brief meandering away was the entrance gate to the freaky wormhole that would get them to Happy Planet by tea time. And as the Prims burst out of the freaky wormhole, they could see what all the fuss was about. Because it was beautiful, so wonderfully colourful, and there were creatures from all over the universe making their way to Happy City. The Prims were most excited. And finally, Space Cop caught up with the Hell's Hoverbikers, and all of a sudden the age-old story of the tortoise and the hare seemed to have a certain truth about it. And whilst flying over the city, Mr. and Mrs. Prim saw something that looked very familiar. Yes, very familiar. "Why, that looks just like our home," said Mrs. Prim. "Yes, it does. Shall we take a closer look?" said Mr. Prim. So they decided to land and stay for a while, for they surely had reached their final destination. And besides, with all that space travel, what they needed was a holiday.